Okay, welcome everybody. Getting ready to start. Another minute or so. I got the thumbnail up a bit late this time. I hope people find it. Okay, we'll get started. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. So I'm going to start a new series this evening. Going to start a series on the 7 enlightenment factors, the Bojjhanga. The word Bojjhanga is a compound. The first part is derived from Buddho, awake, and in combination form, the D's get softened to J's, but it's that word, the same root as in Buddha. And Anga means a part or a segment, generally, and refers to particularly physically to limbs or wings. So a kind of poetic translation suggested for this set of factors is the wings of awakening, which I think is very good and apt, because a bird requires 2 wings to fly. If it only has 1 wing, it won't be able to get off the ground. And the teaching around the 7 Bojjhanga is that they come in 2 sets of 3, and with a balancing factor in the middle, which is Sati or mindfulness. One set of 3 are the energizing factors, that is Dhamma Vichaya, investigation of states, Virya, energy, and Piti, and the other set are of 3 are the tranquilizing factors, samadhi, upekkha, equanimity, and passaddhi, tranquility. And these 3 are these 2 sets of 3 ought to be balanced against one another. In the sutta where the Buddha spoke about this, he used the analogy of trying to keep a fire burning in a steady way, so it neither blazes out of control nor goes out. If the fire is starting to go out, that's the time to throw on dry grass and dry twigs and so on. But if the fire is blazing out of control, that's the time to throw on green sticks and wet grass to damp it down. So when we're balancing our mental states, particularly in meditation, but generally, we should be trying to maintain a balanced, even keel, and not falling either into excessive dullness or into hyperactivity and scattered energy, but to maintain a steady, wakeful energy. And there's another similar list in the five faculties of balancing the mind. So this is something that's very central to practice, to making progress in meditation is all about maintaining a balance and uh, not falling either into dullness or agitation. And seeing with mindfulness in the middle, you can see you should be able to discern your own states of mind and see which of the two wings you need to flap, so to speak. Do you need to energize the mind, or do you need to calm the mind? And you develop these seven factors in a balanced way, rather than going to extremes on one side and neglecting the other. So we'll start today by talking about sati. Sati is usually translated as mindfulness, and I know that translation has been criticized. I know one of our monks told me that he no longer uses the word mindfulness in his teachings because people have so many wrong conceptions about it. But in general, if we try and remember that that we're referring to something specific, we can use the word mindfulness. It's close. It's fairly close. Some of the older translations use the word recollectedness, which is actually somewhat better, even though it's a kind of an awkward word. Now, the problem here is that often sati will be presented as the most important aspect being in the present moment. And there is some truth to that, but it's a little bit misleading as well, because sati actually has some connection to the memory. The Sanskrit version of the word smrti actually refers specifically to memory. And even in the Pali, there's a phrase that occurs frequently in the suttas when some individual is being described as being very mindful and being praised for his mindfulness. And the word is satimant, would be one who has mindfulness. The text will say, so-and-so is satimant. He remembers well that which was said and done long ago. So there's a connection with memory. Also, when some individual with a highly developed mind is reborn with his memories from his previous life intact, it's said he's born satimant. He's born with mindfulness. So there's a connection to memory. And in fact, that's one of the traditional tests that a teacher will give to a student to determine how mindful the person is when the student comes to see the teacher. And this occurs in both in the Thai forest tradition and in Zen. The teacher might ask the student, which side of the door did you leave your sandals on, or your umbrella? And if the student had put them down mindfully, he'll remember easily. But it's also a bit simplistic to equate mindfulness with memory. It's not quite the same thing. I think a good short phrase would be remembering to be present. So it's the mind in the present moment, but it has recollectedness in that you remember to be present, which implies more than a simple naked bare awareness of the momentary object of consciousness, which is a specific aspect of sati that particularly applies in deep meditation. But generally, we remember to be present. We situate our consciousness in the current experience. Something that's a very parallel to this way of thinking about sati is something I read in a writing by Uspensky. Uspensky was a student of Gurdjieff, so they come out of a Sufi tradition. So it's a non-Buddhist tradition, and some of his way of talking about things seem a bit different than the way a Buddhist would phrase it. But he was speaking in this book about an exercise that he'd been given by Gurdjieff when he was training, which was to remember yourself at all times, meaning you remember that you're present in the scene. Now, if you're out and about, you're out in the street, you're looking at trees and cars and other people and so on, it's easy to kind of forget that you are as an individual, you are part of the picture. The consciousness is going entirely outwardly. And Ouspensky recounted that he was diligently practicing this one day when he was walking around in his the city he lived in at the time, which was Copenhagen. He was walking through the streets on various errands, and I'm remembering to be present. And at some point, he went into a tobacconist to buy some pipe tobacco, and he got lost in the sensuality of the aroma of the different tobaccos, and he forgot his practice. And then it came back to him sometime later, a half hour, an hour later, when he was on his way someplace else, was continuing on his business, and suddenly remembered that he should be recollecting himself. And he said that everything that passed in between, from that moment he lost it in the tobacco shop to when he recovered it, felt like a dream. It didn't feel quite real. So this, although it's a way of phrasing the problem that is a little off the way a Buddhist would talk about it, this is essentially the skill of being mindful, of recollecting to be present, to be here and now, and where you are, what you're doing, where you're situated, and so on. We have the sutta on the four satipatthanas, the basis of mindfulness, foundations of mindfulness, which are body, feelings, mental contents, and mental states. And one should practice mindfulness towards these, on these bases. So you're aware of your body and how the limbs are displayed and so on, and you're aware of your feelings, whether you're happy or sad, so on. You're aware of the mental state, and you're aware of the contents of mind. In the practice of Vipassana meditation, we do attempt to focus the Sati, the mindfulness, to a clear observation of the current object. There's always one object being presented to the mind. But even here, we're remembering to do it. We're recollecting that we ought to be present with this object. A related concept is sampajanya, which is usually translated as clear comprehension. And sometimes sati and sampajanya are combined in a single word, a compound word in Pali, sati sampajanya, to indicate general mindfulness. The distinction between the two is not great, but sampajanya is generally considered to be a more generalized form of sati, that you're taking in more of the context, whereas sati is somewhat more focused. There's a story that I've heard in Thailand to illustrate the difference of sati and sampajanya. It said that at one time at Ajahn Chah's monastery at Wat Pah Pong, they had a visit from a monk who was senior to Ajahn Chah. And everybody was very impressed with this monk, his demeanor and his composure. And it seemed like he had excellent sati. You know, he was quite recollected in himself. So someone who has excellent sati, from the outside, you'll see they'll appear to be very composed and proper in their movements and not erratic in any way. But then when they went out an alms round, because he's senior, he was in front of Ajahn Chah, so Ajahn Chah could observe him. And he walked with perfect composure, flawlessly. You know, his robes were folded flawlessly. His steps were absolutely, perfectly correct and balanced. Until they came to a corner in the road, a turn in the road, where the road made a right angle turn. And he kept walking in a flawless manner, straight forward off the road and into the mud. You know? And this was said by Ajahn Chah to illustrate a lack of sampajanya, of clear comprehension of the context. So his mindfulness was not broad enough to take in the full picture. In the commentaries, it said there are 4 aspects to sampajanya. There is clear comprehension of the purpose. It means whatever you're doing, you should have an understanding of why you're doing it. What's the purpose of this? And that's part of clear comprehension. Of the suitability, is this am I doing, which could also be called skill in means. Am I doing this in a good way, a proper way, an efficient way? Gochara, which is literally domain, which means is this thing proper for me to be doing at all? Is it within the domain of my practice, or have I wandered off? and finally, clear comprehension of reality, which is essentially seeing the three characteristics and particularly the emptiness of all things. So taken together, it's a broader kind of view than pure sati, which is more focused, more remembering to be present in the present moment, the present immediate circumstances. It takes less, sati by itself takes less concern with context than sati sampajanya, which is broader. So in terms of its place in the Bojjhanga, the seven factors of enlightenment, you can think of the two wings of awakening as like a board on a balance beam, and the fulcrum point, the midpoint is sati. Sati always has to be present. In the Visuddhimagga, it said that there's no such thing as too much sati. Sati is required in all circumstances, and uses the analogy that just as salt improves the taste of every dish, which I've always thought was perhaps doubtful from a culinary point of view. I don't think Buddhaghosa was probably a good cook. You can improve the taste of every dish with salt, but he was trying to make the point that sati or mindfulness is something required at all times in all circumstances, whether the mind is dull or whether it's energized. You still need sati. And in fact, you need sati to be able to, or sati sampajanya even, to determine which side of the equation you need to balance. If your meditation is not going well, if there's some problem with your meditation, it's generally always in one of two ways. Though there might be a lot of variation, there's still two broad categories. Either the mind is too dull, you're too sleepy, you're bored, you're not energized, or the mind is too jumpy and erratic and restless and cannot be still. And when these defilements arise in a coarse manner, it's easy to spot. But part of the skill of getting into more deeper states of meditation is being able to see the subtle balances when the mind is just going a little bit off the center point, and to bring it back by emphasizing one set of factors or the other. And sati is required for that. The sati turned towards the objects and the state of the mind. One should be clearly mindful of these various factors. This applies in general life in all circumstances, but it's of particular importance in developing meditation, of any kind of meditation. There has to be a clarity about one's own state so that you can develop it. So I'll stop the formal remarks here, and I'll go to the chat and see what we've got. I see chat's already very busy. I'll see if there's questions there. Okay, this is a fairly lengthy question. I'll read it out. Ajahn, sati is often associated with vipassana or insight. However, in the suttas, MN 44, among others, the four satipatthanas are described as the basis for samadhi. Indistinction is more prominent in the Burmese tradition, but not in the Thai. The Thai teachers do teach that sati forms the basis for samadhi. Would you please comment on this? Thank you. Yes, the relationship between sati and samadhi. This is important. They're both path factors, and uh, so being factors of the Eightfold Path, they both are required for awakening. Um, in the Thai tradition, as you point out, in the Thai tradition, there is a generally a de-emphasis on the different kinds of meditation. As Ajahn Chah said, that sati and samadhi are two sides of the same stick, and they do work together. In any kind of meditation will require both. But if we're going to examine particular meditation methods or techniques, there will be a difference of emphasis. Um, Samatha meditations that lead to jhana will require primarily samadhi as the most important factor, and vipassana meditations uh, rely more on sati. And as the questioner points out, these were developed primarily in Burma, and the emphasis is on being clearly mindful of the objects of consciousness, which requires sati. But samadhi is required for stilling and holding the mind. Even to do vipassana, it can't be done without a strong component of samadhi. Okay, let's see. There is some comments, but I don't see, haven't yet seen one in the form of a question. Let's see. Since there is no stream of event in the universe unconditioned by other streams of events, all of these streams of events constituents of one giant stream, or perhaps these are infinite streams like in the Mandelbrot set. Um, I think that's sort of kind of question that's not possible to answer, and it's like the man with the poison arrow, and uh, he wants to know before the physician pulls the arrow out. He wants to know what wood the shaft is made from, what the feathers are made from, and so on. These sort of very esoteric metaphysical questions don't in one sense they're sort of unanswerable, because on one sense they're beyond our ordinary comprehension to finally really settle that question. I mean, you could make a case for either position, but also it's not conducive to ending suffering and to awakening. We don't really need to know the ultimate nature of the universe. Do you have tips for keeping sati strong after lunch when one feels sleepy? Um, one approach is to be more active immediately after lunch. To uh, If one's on retreat, for example, to do walking meditation, or to do some in the daily life. If one doesn't want to be sleepy, to be more active in that period, more physically active, not to sit down and take it easy and get more sleepy. Ajahn, is there a necessary relationship between sati and sila? To what extent is sila a prerequisite for sati? Increasingly, mindfulness is presented as a sila-independent procedure or method. Yeah, that is an excellent question, because I think that is a problem in some modern presentations of Buddhist practice, that trying to extract the meditation from the rest of the package. For awakening, all 8 path factors must be present. So that would include right speech and right action. That is sila. Sila is ethics, or keeping precepts. And without keeping precepts, it becomes very difficult, or if not impossible, to develop good sati, because one of the benefits of keeping precepts is having a mind free of remorse and regret. When you break precepts, basically acting unethically in an unskillful way, the mind will be plagued by that. You'll feel guilty, or you'll feel afraid that you'll be caught, and it becomes impossible for the mind to be at peace. Whereas if you live in a blameless manner, you don't have those issues, and then sati becomes Can sati simultaneously acknowledge all of these streams at the same time, like a huge neural network? Uh, Sati is to be so simply put as myself, your as my sati, your sati, and every being sati connected. Again, this is far too metaphysical of a thing to be concerned with. That you have your own mind to deal with, and you're if you can examine the mind very closely, it's taking an object at a time. Uh, and it's really only our own mind that we have to work with, and whether that has any how this is related to the whole stream of other consciousnesses in the universe and other events and processes in the universe is a kind of theoretical or metaphysical exercise, and is not ultimately either knowable or useful. Could Ajahn, could you relate sati to choiceless awareness meditation? How advanced is this practice? Well, choiceless awareness meditation is attempting to be present with whatever the object of consciousness is. If one can actually do that, and it's very conducive of good results. The problem is that uh, this meditation being so unstructured, the mind, unless you're very clear and disciplined to begin with, the mind will tend to wander and be very unfocused. And there's a kind of a general fuzzy awareness, but there's no clarity in it. You know, that's why in the Burmese tradition, they developed very specific techniques of meditation to, such as the Mahasi Sayadaw noting method, or the Pa'ak method of based on the elements, or Goenka body scanning. All of these methods provide a structure and a discipline to kind of guide sati to some degree, although the end point is a kind of choiceless awareness, because you're not conjuring things up to look at. You're looking at whatever is presented to consciousness, but without a disciplined framework to hold that, the mind just gets very, for most people, the mind will get very fuzzy and vague, and it doesn't have that precision that's really needed to break through. What to say of recollection of Dhamma in the dream state? Yeah, that's possible to do. It is possible to take mindfulness right through into the dream state, and one can have like a lucid dream. One's aware that you're dreaming, and you can even then practice meditation in the dream state. So it's very interesting to practice that way. One way of inducing lucid dreaming that works pretty effectively, if anyone wants to explore this, is to make a practice during your day, during your ordinary day, of at random times, 4 or 5 times during the day, just ask yourself, just for a few seconds, ask yourself very seriously, am I awake now, or am I dreaming? And actually examine the mind for a moment and determine, is this the wakefulness, or is this a dream? And you set up a habit of doing that, and eventually, after a few days or a week of this, you'll ask yourself, in the dream state, am I awake or dreaming? And at first, you may be confused in the dream and decide you're awake, and it doesn't work. But at some point, you'll notice, oh, I'm dreaming, but I'm conscious. Could you speak on the Bojjhanga Paritta? The Bojjhanga Paritta is one of the parittas which are protective chants, and is one that's particularly recommended for healing illness. That chanting the Bojjhanga Paritta for a sick person, or when one's sick oneself, has a healing quality. And even as it's said in that text, even contemplating the enlightenment factors when one is ill can have a healing quality. I'm trying to find the next question. Would you please comment on the idea of Mahasati, that is a mental faculty found in advanced meditators? Is there a basis for this in suttas or Abhidhamma? No, I don't think that's found in the. I don't think the term Mahasati is found there. I think it's a very much later idea. I have made progress on my meditation, yet I observe my mind continue to be jumpy. Any suggestion on how to be more successful? Well, when we talk about the 3 tranquilizing factors, that may help. That if your mind is jumpy, that means you need to tranquilize the mind. It's over energized. You need to bring up samadhi, equanimity, and tranquility. Is sati the basis to develop all the paramitas and attain nibbana? It's certainly one critical factor. It's not the only one. You need to develop the whole Eightfold Path. Is the 5th sila specifically for intoxicants that hinder sati? What about intoxicants that potentially increase sati? Well, there's no intoxicant that increases sati. The 5th precept is defined as those substances that would have the potential to cause a person to act foolishly. So that would imply that intoxication is defined here as a diminution of sati. There's a lack of mindfulness, then you're going to act in a foolish way. So anything that causes confusion or dullness in the mind would be defined as an intoxicant. Could you please give instructions on the techniques of doing the asubha aspects of the body meditation, or point to a sutta or book to learn from? I assume you're referring, there's 2 different practices you could be referring to. One is the 32 parts of the body, and one is the corpse meditation, which really technically the corpse meditation is what's called a subha, but often the other is as well. The 32 parts of the body, you can find the list in many places. you go through the body mentally and visualize these different parts, starting with hair of the head, hair of the body, nail, teeth, skin. And you visualize each part uh, briefly, bring it to mind, and do it once in the forward direction and then once again backward. And after doing that, you choose one part that seemed easy to visualize, and you spend the rest of the time in the meditation visualizing that part, whether it be bones or blood or guts or whatever sort of stuck out for you when you were going through the list. The meditation on corpses is the most effectively done with an actual corpse to contemplate the decay of the body, but it's also can be done mentally by imagining a body going through these various stages of decay down to a skeleton, then the skeleton crumbles to dust. That's a meditation to really strengthen the contemplation of impermanence and also to overcome sensuality attached to the body. The 32 parts meditation, besides overcoming sensuality, it helps to break down the attachment to the body as a self by seeing it's composed of parts and pieces. Have you been to Shambhala or Agartha? No, no. Do you believe it exists? I don't know. I don't particularly have an opinion on that one way or the other. That's something totally outside of my tradition, actually. Sati is mentioned as being like the guard or gate against intruders. Can Sati, as being related to memory, be considered as a guard against the invasion of ignorance, the evil one's last fetter? Yes, yeah, that's the questioner is referencing one of the similes that occurs for Sati is like a gatekeeper. Sati is like the guard at the gate who prevents evildoers from entering the town. It's just like a good mindfulness will prevent the defilements from entering the mind. So you see you see the defilement in its very uh, original weak form when it's first starting to arise, and you can then choose not to allow it to dominate the mind. But if you're not mindful, they sneak in and take over before you know it. Are noble beings able to keep their sati in dreams? For example, during nocturnal emissions, lustful dreams are common. Can your actions during this time potentially indicate your level of attainment? Yeah, this is actually one of the, believe it or not, it's one of the controversies that divided the schools in early Buddhism, whether an arahant could have a wet dream or not. And the Theravada position, which I think is well borne out um, by the definitions of what it constitutes an arahant, is that no, it would not be possible for an arahant to either have lustful dreams or to have a nocturnal emission, because the base of sensuality has been completely eliminated. So there's no seed for that to arise in the mind. It's not possible for it to arise in the mind of an arahant. If one finds oneself nodding off during meditation, it would be better to go to sleep or to try to work through it. Generally, be better to work through it, but that would depend generally on the circumstances. Like if you had not had enough sleep the night before and you were exhausted and trying to meditate, you'd probably be better off in that case to have a short nap. But generally it's better to try and overcome it. Even if you can't manage to keep mindful and wakeful while sitting, then get up and do walking meditation. I've heard that the Bodhipatya Dhamma is also called the wings to awakening. Yeah, that's true. That's also that was actually Tanisaro's book. He titled it that. He had a book about the Bodhipatya Dhammas, which is a larger list, and that could also be translated aptly as wings to awakening. So it's not really a problem. It's a longer list that includes the Bojjhanga. It's a list of all the positive factors in various sub lists. Okay. I missed your talk last week, Vijay Ignorance. Yeah, they do. I don't know. I'm not sure if it's actually from the suttas. Cause of ignorance is said to be the asavas, which are uh, the root defilements of uh, basically wrong view and sensuality. There are so many concepts and lists in Buddhism that I often find myself forgetting to utilize a certain idea in certain situation. How do I keep from being overwhelmed? Yeah, there is quite a bit. You just have to keep working on it. That's kind of the benefit of study. It's useful. Some of these lists, so they're readily available in the mind. That's why they're there. You know, that's why the Buddha gave them in the form of lists, which is certainly a characteristic of his teaching. So we can have something to hold in the mind. One of my teachers used to say that if you're trying to remember a list of factors, 7 enlightenment factors or 5 defilements or whatever, and you're stuck and you can't remember one of them, that's always the one you need to work on. Okay, getting close to the end here. I'll take another question or two and then call it. Is it possible to be negatively influenced when practicing metta with universal pervasion to sentient beings? Is this the case? Should you recommend a protective action? No, you can't. Metta is itself a very powerful protective action. You really get, you can't really be harmed doing metta, and you're not allowing any avenue for any kind of harmful influence to enter the mind. Isn't ignorance included in the asavas? That sort of a circular argument. Yeah, it is. I mean, a lot of these lists end up being self-referential. That doesn't really make them make them invalid. Okay, I have one more question I'll take, and then I have to sign off. When I encounter a difficult life situation, how does one decide whether to stick with it while attempting to attain equanimity or walk away from it? Yeah, that's a very difficult decision. And it's one I cannot, of course, give a definitive answer to because the specific circumstances will require will have to be taken into account. This is where you need wisdom, particularly, to make that judgment, to access all from a place of equanimity, not from a place of agitation or fear or delusion, but from place of wisdom and detached wisdom and equanimity to look at the situation and decide, is this situation doing me more good or more harm? And if it's doing me more harm than good, it's probably best to terminate it, to walk away from it. Some things cannot be fixed. Some things are just going to always be a burden. And if it's not aiding you, if it's not conducive to your peace of mind and your happiness, then you have to ask yourself why you're holding on to it. Okay, I'll thank you all for coming and take my leave, and see you next week, same time.